Hey, Phil Wesson here with a very quick and down and dirty tutorial for Hitfilm. This tutorial is specifically to answer a question from Raymond St. Paul on YouTube. And it was just a real basic overview on how to do a quick movie title effect using Hitfilm. I'm using Hitfilm 2 Ultimate right now, but I'm sure a lot of these can still be done with Hitfilm 2 Standard or even Hitfilm 1. So to start out, I made this fictional movie called the VFX Artist, as you can see on the screen. And I made 4 different versions of this. We're just going to start with something really basic, and I'll give you some tips on how I did this as well as how I did some of the other variations of it. So to get started, here is what the first one looks like. As you can see, it's just text moving backwards in Z space. There's a little bit of motion blur applied, but it's really nothing special. It's just very simple stuff. Actually, to give a little bit of background, this was the video that Raymond St. Paul actually was asking me to take a look at. And as you can see, a lot of these different videos or these titles rather, are just really the text moving back in Z space with a bunch of lens flares, particle effects, and things of that sort. We're not going to get this in depth now. That would be a much larger tutorial, and it's all stuff that I really think Hitfilm can do itself, but it's a Monday night and I've got work in the morning. So that being said, let's get back to it. So getting back here, we've got again our text just flying in from the background. So to start off, I'm going to start completely from scratch, and I'm going to try not to screw this up. From Hitfilm, you're going to start here once it starts up, and there's actually some tutorial that we'll probably want to look at from later on. This textured text one, I believe it's from Axel, so you can check that out later on just for how to texture 3D text, which is something we might get to. But to start out, we're going to hit New Project. I'm not going to, since I already have a project up and running, but you're going to hit this. You're going to define the dimensions and frame rate of your project, and which is actually this screen. Your frame rate, your aspect, sample rate for audio, which is not really a big concern for us, but right now I have mine set to 1920 by 1080, which is standard 1080p resolution. So next you're going to go to Edit and Effects. I'm going to start a new composite shot here. We'll just name it title for tutorial. Standard dimensions and frame rate that's taken just from the actual project file, and I'm going to hit Create. So we're going to start out with just a blank screen, and the first thing we need to do is add some text. So to do that, we'll hit the T button up here, or you can hit T on the keyboard. Draw a box where your text is going to appear and type in your movie title. Right now I'm using Gunplay, the text. It's a free font you can get. Just search for it. I'm not really sure where I found it. But we want to get this looking how we want it to in the end for this one. So first thing I'm going to do is center align it. I'm going to make the font larger, and I'm going to position it. I just hit this cursor up here, and I'm going to move that down a bit. Now, to get that actual effect of it moving past the camera, what you need to do is actually make this a 3D layer. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit this button right here next to the new text layer. I'm going to just select 3D plane, which puts this technically on a 3D plane. I do not need the coordinate system right now, so I'm going to turn that off by clicking this button right here. Now, when you made this a 3D plane, it makes a camera that you can't really see here, but if we go to perspective view and click on the orbit tool, we can actually see that there's the camera right there that's looking at this 3D plane where our title is. So going back to the active camera right here, I'm going to make this animation about 5 seconds. It's usually a bit shorter, but just to keep things rounded, 5 seconds seems fine to me. So if you put your cursor at 5 seconds, 501 is fine. Hit the out button. This is just setting the length of your animation, of your movie rather. And nothing's happening right now because we really haven't done anything. We do know that we want the title to end here, so that's fine. I'm actually going to work backwards. I'm going to select my text layer. I'm actually going to rename it as title just to make things easier. And what I want to do is I'm going to go up here to controls, which is going to control anything that's associated with this particular layer. I'm going to go to transform, which is actually moving it in space. And I'm going to make a keyframe probably a little bit right before the 5-second mark, so probably about a second in. And I'm going to hit the position keyframe, which is basically saying at this point in time it needs to be at these coordinates right here. And then I'm going to move back to the beginning. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take the Z coordinate, which is forward and backward. If you imagine X, Y, and Z, X being left and right, Z being up and down, and I'm sorry, X being left and right, Y being up and down, and Z being backwards and forward. If I start moving this in the positive direction, it's going to start moving towards the camera. Alternatively, negative direction is going to move it away from the camera. It's already at this point here, it's where we want it to be, so this is going to be basically where we're starting it at. So we want it to start behind the camera, so I'm going to move it in the positive direction until it is well past the camera. If we were to play this right now, it flies by exactly as we want it to. But the thing is, it flies by and it stops like a hard stop right here. We don't want it to do that. We want it to kind of ease into that. So what we can do is right click on this keyframe, go to Interpolation, and hit Smooth. Now if you can imagine a graph, what this would do is basically move the X so that it smooths into, moves the Z so it smooths into that ending position. So instead of it ending at a hard stop, it's going to keep going and it's going to slow down once it gets close to that keyframe and it's going to stop, rather than the hard stop. This looks boring though. So what we're going to do, first thing is I'm going to add a light, just to add a little bit of effect to the title. So there's a number of ways you can do this. You can hit New Layer and click Light, or you can right click in the timeline here and go to New Layer and hit Light. Now what this did, obviously, is it made a light, but the light is so far away from the actual text that the text is not being illuminated. As you can see, I'm moving the light backwards and forward in Z space, and once it gets in front of the actual text, it lights it up. So this is kind of cool. There's actually a fantastic tutorial by Rodipolis on making a cool, title like this. His is much better than mine. This is really quick and dirty, but I highly recommend you check it out. I'll put either a annotation on this video, or it'll be in the description down below. So anyways, right, we've got our movie title. It's animating the way we want it to. Actually, it's not, because what's happening here, if we go to the perspective view and we turn the camera and we go back here, we can see the title right in here is moving past the light over here. But once it does, that's when the title is illuminated. But that's no good because we don't see it coming up. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move this light further down in Z space, or closer to the camera actually. So now what's going to happen is the title is actually going to move past the camera a little earlier. Past the light a little earlier. It's going to be illuminated, and it will be illuminated for the duration of the rest of its journey to the keyframe that we set up earlier. So going back to our active camera, we see it kind of come into effect there. Still, it's not quite as visible as I'd like, so I'm just going to move this all the way back. So there you can see the movie title just goes past the camera, it's illuminated, and we see it, and that's great. Now, it's still kind of boring, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to select the title, and I'm going to hit the motion blur button. What that does is then it designates that motion blur is applied to this movie, this layer rather, and you can barely see it there, so I'm going to use a little trick to make the motion blur a little bit better. If you go to Properties here for the composite, go to Advanced, change the shutter angle to 720, max samples to 40 or 60, and shutter phase to 180. That's just going to pump the motion blur up a little bit more. Additionally, that's also going to make it's going to make it a little bit more CPU intensive, since it's calculating the difference in the Z direction for each one of those. So it could slow this down. As you can see, it's getting a little choppier. You don't see it as much because the further it gets, it's not necessarily moving very fast. One way to change this, select your text. I'm going to click these down now. This is my position. It's the same position from up here. So if I go back here to the first one, and I'm actually going to move this further back in Z space. Now you can't really see exactly what that's doing, but it's moving it further away from the camera in the opposite direction. Now the trick here is that it's still covering the same, not the same amount of distance, but it's in the same amount of time covering a greater distance, which is going to increase the rate of how fast it's going. So as it gets over here, the motion blurs a little bit more. So that's how you do the first one. Let's do a quick RAM preview. And there we go. So as you can see, it just flies in, and that's really basic. And I apologize for the speed of my computer. I'm actually running this on the Mac using Boot Camp, so it's not necessarily the perfect setup for Hitfilm, but it gets the job done until the Mac version is released. Now, there's a number of different ways that I've done basically the same thing, but it's using the same kind of the same concept of moving past the camera in Z space, and there's a number of different things you can do with it. Going to this first one here, this title, the VFX Artist, same thing, moving in Z space, a little bit of motion blur you can see right here, but to make it a little bit more exciting, we're going to do this. This next one is the same thing, but the only difference, well, there's two differences. One, the text is extruded in 3D, and two, the text rotates about a third of the way through. This does not look very nice right now, just because I have my render settings set to half. Computer's been acting up, and I'm not in the mood to try and figure it out. But let's go through how we do this. We'll actually use the same title we used before, title for tutorial. Here we are. So again, this is moving. I'm actually going to turn off motion blur just for the sake of the tutorial right now. You can turn it off during, or turn it on during rendering rather. But to make the text three-dimensional, first thing we do, go up to Effects here and type in Extrude. You're going to get 3D extrusion layer only. So you're going to drag this to your title layer, and you can already see there's a little bit of extrusion. Going back over here to the controls panel, you can see under Effect, 3D extrusion is here selected. We're going to move that down, and then we can change the depth. So as you can see, the title's actually getting thicker in 3D space. It's actually got some depth there. I'm going to turn the quality to normal for now so I don't slow the computer down. Let's see, scale fit. There we go. Now, it's doing the same thing. But right now, it's just moving the actual layer, and that's not necessarily what we want it to do. I mean, I guess we could, but one of the things that's interesting about the 3D extrusion and a number of other effects is that you can move it in 3D space, but if I was to move this around in 3D space, you see that this is essentially just stamped on this plane here. So it's got the illusion of 3D when it's not actually 3D, and there's a way to change that. So let's undo this. I'm going to make a new point just by going to New Layer and Point there, and I'm going to change the point to 3D. Next, I'm going to go back to my title layer, and under Position, under 3D Extrusion, I'm going to say Transform from Point, New Point. And I'm horrible at naming my layers, so I'm actually going to go back and do that now. I'm going to name this 3D Controller. So now it's moving in relation to this 3D controller. So if I was to take the 3D controller, go to its Transform Tools, and again, here's your X, Y, and Z, left and right, up and down, and Z depth. And I was going to rotate it around the Y axis. You start to see there's actual 3D depth to this. So that's actually how we're going to do the rotation. Now, it looks like the title is already moving back in Z-space. I'm not sure I like how that's working out. Let's try this real quick. We're going to actually play around with keyframes a little bit here. So right now we're dealing with the 3D controller. If we pick width this down, not pick width, that's After Effects, excuse me. If we just move that down and we go to the rotation Y, which again is up and down, it's this green axis here. We want to move it along this green axis. I'm going to make a keyframe here, and I'm going to move the keyframe down a little bit. This is where it's going to finish turning. So I'm going to move this up a bit, and then I'm going to change this under the Y to 90 degrees. So now it's got 90 degrees here, and then 0 degrees here, so it moves a total of 90 degrees, just quarter of a circle, until it gets there. Now again, this is a really hard turn. It's very mathematical, so we actually want this to ease in. So again, we're going to right click on that, go to Interpolation, and go to Smooth, and now it's going to smoothly transform from 90 degrees to 0 degrees and continue on until the end. Now, when I was saying we're going to play with keyframes a bit, now that we have these set up, I can select them and I can move them earlier in the timeline, which just means that turn is going to happen earlier. Or I can select this last one and move it, which means the turn is going to happen over this time period. So as I scroll through, it's kind of happening more gradually. So again, that's another way to do this. You can turn on a motion blur, it'll look great and fantastic, and everybody will love you and everything will be happy. So that's the second way of doing it. The third way, and this is just all, again, adding on the same kind of concept. Third one here is same thing, and I just added a lens flare and added some light rays. Now the way I did this is actually a fairly cool tutorial, I believe, by Simon Jones, just on how to use volumetric lighting, but again, quick and dirty, here's how we're going to do it. First things first, the cool thing about this one is not necessarily just the title, but the depth that you assume because of the flare behind it. So a really quick and easy way to make that flare is, first off, I'm going to turn the text off just because I'm not dealing with it right now and I don't want to change anything about the text. I'm going to get a new layer, and I'm going to make a plane. And I'm going to make a black plane, and I'm going to name this Flare. Hit create, and you can't really see it because it's black on black, but you're going to take this flare layer and you're going to move it to the very back. From here, in the effects panel, you're going to type in flare, and grab light flares plugin, or filter rather, drag it onto your flare layer. Now this is the default flare. I'm sure it's great for some things, but it's not great for what we're using right now. So going over to the effect tab, we're going to select light flare, select hot spot position. Right now it's kind of off center. It's -200 x by 200 y. So we're going to zero these out just to move it back to the middle, and I'm going to select a different type of flare. Right now it's this 105 prime. I'm going to go down to sun glare, which doesn't look too exciting right now, but there's actually a great little trick. First of all, you can move this around, and if this had secondaries, this second little notch here would allow you to move those. However, right now I'm only concerned with this glare. I'm actually going to make it a little bit smaller. So if you go to hotspot, which is what this is, and go to scale, you can move that down. Just want it to be kind of not too imposing, just right about there. Now, one thing about Hitfilm's lens flares that I kind of wish they took a note from Video Copilot was that there's a little bit more customization options in Video Copilot's optical flares. Sorry guys. But that being said, there's a cool way to actually customize your flares here, which is literally just to grab the lens flares again and drag it right under the first lens flares. So actually, you know what? Scratch that. Delete that. Right click on your light flares here and just hit duplicate. So the settings are pretty much the same. Go into your secondary lens flares and pick one that has these secondaries that you want. For example, let's say golden artifacts. We're going to actually turn off the hotspot. So if you go down to hotspot and bring the brightness or scale completely down to 0, and all we're dealing with is the other elements. So you can take the secondary tool and you can move that around. These are the other elements. So you're getting the original flare from the sun glare and these secondary elements from this golden artifacts. I'm actually deciding now I don't really want that one. Maybe we'll go to anamorphic streak. No. How about diffraction streaks? No. How about digital stripe? That's cool. So I'm going to move this where I want it, probably about here. So these two are actually acting independent of each other. And I'm going to go to the second one, and instead of screen, I'm going to hit add. Which can't really make much difference. I just feel better about it. Add, basically, the way I work, add is used for any element that is generating light. Screen is used for any light element that you want to be able to see on top of a dark element. So since this is a lens flare, it's generating light, I'm going to set it to add. It might not make much of a difference in this particular tutorial, but it's just a good practice for me to follow. So going back here and turning the title back on, when it ends, you're going to have this movie title with the flare behind it. Again, quick and dirty, doesn't look great, but this is a good start. So right now, the flare just stays there as this comes in. And yeah, that might be cool, it might not be. But it would be really cool if just about here it turned on. So at this frame, I'm actually going to go to both of these and I'm going to set keyframes for the intensity. So for here, or not the intensity, the brightness for the hotspot. Right now it's at 85, and then the intensity for the, I think it's other elements, we'll find out in a second. Yeah, that's it. Brightness, the intensity right here. Now we're actually going to go back. We're going to zero these out because it's starting here, so it's not going to have this full brightness. But it is going to have that full brightness by the end. So here, if we scroll down to light flares and brightness here, I'm going to make another keyframe. And I'm going to make another keyframe right here for the brightness for the other elements. So if we go back to this first keyframe, I'm going to set this to 0 now. And I'm going to do that again for this one up here. So now over the course of this bit of time here, it's going to go from 0 to whatever we wanted it to. So again, it's kind of cool. Now, how did we do the kind of volumetric shadow from behind here? There's two ways. Well, actually, there's one way that I know of, and that's using light rays. So up in the effects panel, you're going to hit rays, you type rays, take the light rays filter plugin, I suppose, and we are going to apply that to the, let's see here, to the text. And that looks kind of weird. And that's fine for now. We're going to turn the intensity down. Turn the radius up. Now this is great if we wanted this to be generating light, but we don't. We want it to be generating a shadow. So instead of add, which is something that we use for generating light, we're going to use multiply. So come down to multiply, and you can't really see it here, but once the flare comes in, you can kind of see it there. Now this effect would obviously be better if you had something brighter back there, but for now actually what I want to do is I want to take those light rays and put them on. I don't believe you can actually, oh, actually no, this is a layer, so you can put the light rays on the layer and you can see it's super bright, kind of lightens up this stuff back here. So if I turn light rays back on for the movie title itself, you get some shadowing there. So that again is a little bit CPU intensive, and so it's kind of messing with my computer, but we'll just do the best we can. The shadows are not dark enough on the title, so we select the title and we just turn the intensity up, and that just darkens that a bit. I'm going to turn my render down just so that it's a little bit more manageable. So there we go. Now, there's a lot we can do with this. You can always go back, customize a bunch of these things, turn the intensity down on this back flare. You can animate the flares so that as it comes in here. It gets really bright first, so actually I'm going to keyframe the intensity and turn that up. And then as it goes a little bit more, I'm going to turn it back down. And you kind of have, you know, kind of really hit first and then down. And then you can actually go through and you can kind of finesse this. You know, turn your interpolation back to smooth, you know, mess with the timing, just like that. Scroll through it again, boom, movie title, very cool. All right. Another thing we can do is 3D clouds. Now this is going to be, again, based off of your particular system. It's actually going to be pretty intensive. I'm trying to remember exactly how I did this one. This is, there's a number of things going on here. If we look at this right now and turn these layers off, and we'll just go one by one. Let's keep the camera on. You've got a fluffy cloud particle simulator. Who thought they'd be saying that, right? And then on top of that, you've got a light here, a point light, that's illuminating just this section of the cloud. So again, the light off is the full cloud, just default lighting, and light on is, you know, just this area. Then I threw a flare in there, same kind of thing as before. This flare is set, I believe, to add. Actually, overlay. All right. So add would look like this, and that's a little bit too intense. It is pretty cool, but it's too intense right now. So I'm going to set this to overlay. I'm sure there's a very fantastic definition of what overlay does. I don't know it right now, so you're just going to have to look that up. However, for now, just adding that. I put a grade layer on top. This grade layer is basically is a blank layer, kind of like an adjustment layer in Photoshop. But what it does is it affects all the layers below it. So right now it's affecting the flare, this light, and the fluffy cloud particle simulator. So what this effect is, I'm using a brightness and contrast filter just to kind of bring some of the lights out of the cloud and darken the darks. Actually, if I turn off light rays, you'll be able to see. If I turn off the brightness, it's the brightness and contrast. I'm lowering the brightness a little bit and raising the contrast a lot, just to get this kind of look. Then I applied light rays, which if you remember before was that kind of volumetric lighting, and I applied that again right after the brightness and contrast. You can look at the settings here and kind of see where I was going with it. Just make the position wherever you like. You know, it's going to affect how that looks. And then here's our text layer. We can just turn on. Again, the text layer, very much like before, has the 3D extrusion and the light rays. The light rays are set to multiply to be a shadow rather than it's generating light. Here is a new grade layer, which is some more light rays. Just not really sure why I added that, but you know, sometimes you just gotta go through and see, you know, add a couple things here and there. Does this look cool? Does that look cool? You know, a lot of this you'll do by mistake and find that the effect actually looks pretty sweet. Here is the controller. That's just basically the location of the text layer, your camera, and a last light. This last light is just a regular, what is this kind of light? This is actually a directional light that is just illuminating the text here. So that's basically how you do it. It's just a matter of adding, you know, what's in your foreground, what's in your background, and you know, add a bit of a variation to it. There's a number of things you can do. You can add some particle effects, you can add flames, you can add more motion blur, you can add more clouds and flares. It's really up to you. But again, quick and dirty, that's kind of how you do it. Again, some tutorials I would recommend would be Rody Polis's tutorial on his text tutorial. I'll put the link in the description, as well as Axel's textured text tutorial, which would be great for something like this, just to add texture to this title and then go with it. You know, you've got plenty of tools here. Hitfilm is a fantastic piece of software, so give it a shot and see what you can come up with. Again, my name is Phil Wesson. You can go to philwesson.com to see my blog, any videos that I've been doing, my YouTube channel. I'll put a link to. Well, technically, if you're watching this, you're probably on my YouTube channel, so congratulations for finding it. And I will see you next time. Thanks a lot.